In doing this one, she was a woman who lived in Lyndonville all her life, and she was a pretty tenacious lady. She wanted to do something, she went ahead and did it. And I found this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt: "Women are like tea bags. We don't know our true strength until we're in hot water." I like that.
Makes sense.
And Shirley Chisholm said, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair." So I think that sums up a lot of good stuff for women. Lydia Selina Johnson was usually known as Aunt Selina. She came from a family in Lyndonville. Her grandfather, Stephen Johnson, was a soldier in the Revolutionary War under General Putnam. Her father, Stephen Burr Johnson, was a soldier in the War of 1812, and she was a nurse in the Civil War. So her family was there to serve. She was a direct descendant on her grandmother's side of the historic Burr family. So Aaron Burr was in her background. Stephen Burr Johnson, her father, was born in Washington County, New York in 1794. He came to the town of Yates in 1817, and the next year purchased a farm, which is partly included in the village of Lyndonville. In 1819, he married Maria Gilbert. 5 children were born to them. Lydia Selina was the youngest. She was born April 21st, 1830. In early life, she taught school for 1 term. During September 1862, she enlisted as an Army nurse under Miss Dorothy Dix and went to Washington. Here she ministered to wounded Federals for about 9 months when she was stricken with typhoid fever and returned to the North. After 8 months of convalescing, she returned and was placed in charge of the dietary kitchen in the old seminary hospital at Fortress Monroe. At the close of the war, she returned home. In local affairs, she always had been a pioneer. She was a prime investigator and organizer of the Literary and Historical Club of the town of Yates, and was a member and staunch supporter of the Methodist Episcopal Church. In years, she passed the age of 85, and on May 13, 1915, she passed. Death resulted from a shock she received from a fractured hip in a fall. The funeral services were held at the home of her niece, Mrs. Jessie Johnson, and she's buried in Lyndonville Cemetery. It's suggested that she was the longest period of service for any nurse in the Civil War. And she was the only female to go to the Civil War from this county. So I think she's someone we should know about. She served from September 1862 until July 1864. Her work was in Georgetown, D.C., Chesapeake General Hospital, and Old Point in Virginia. She served 1 year with the Sanitary Commission in Jefferson Barracks, Missouri. And she was one of the nurses who, under Dorothy Dix, passed through hospital streamers the effect of smallpox from 1861 to 65. She, in fact, contracted smallpox, came home, recovered, and went back. So she's one of those tea bags, you know.
Yeah.
She was recognized as having one of the longest, if not the longest, terms of service for any Civil War nurse. It tells a little bit about what it was like to be a nurse in the Civil War. In the hospital, men lie on rotten straw. The nurses are convalescent soldiers, so nearly sick themselves that they ought to be in the wards. And from their feebleness, they are selfish and sometimes inhumane in their treatment of patients. So before women nurses came about, wounded men were helping other wounded men in the hospitals. They didn't have a corps of nurses. So in June of 1861, this was the creation of the U.S. Sanitary Commission. a private organization recognized by the federal government, but run by civilians. The medical needs of the military to acquire and distribute food, clothing, and medical supplies to soldiers in military hospitals, and to organize military hospitals and camps, and arrange transportation for the wounded. So they really hit the ground running. They had a lot of things to help with, and more men were being called up. So if they had recovered from that broken arm they had, or that bullet wound, they were expected to go back and fight some more. So they didn't stay in hospitals or the buildings where they had the wounded, because they were needed back on the field. So that's when women nurses started to become very important. No previous training was required to be a nurse, because no programs of that sort existed. So you went in and you took care of whoever needed taken care of for whatever thing they had. That's what a nurse did. In 1869, 4 years after the war ended, the American Medical Association convened a committee to investigate whether there was a need for nurse training programs. It is just as necessary to have well-trained, well-instructed nurses as it is to have intelligent and skillful physicians. So it was after the war was done, but they decided, well, maybe we ought to be training nurses. You know, they did come in kind of handy. And Lydia was set up to receive a pension, which was extremely unusual. It didn't happen for any women. I mean, they were just nurses, and there were only just a few of them. But the Congress went into session and passed a bill that said that women to whom was referred the bill granting a pension to Lydia S. Johnson, having examined the same. In other words, she had put in enough time and was recognized enough that she received a pension from the United States government, the first woman nurse to receive one. What she received was $12 a month. So she was hauling in loot. The bill read, "Be it enacted that the Secretary of the Interior be and he is hereby directed to place on the pension roll the name of Lydia S. Johnson of Yates, Orleans County, New York, and a nurse in the Army during the late Civil War, and to pay her the sum of $12 per month." It was laid aside, but it was reported on later that it had passed. They had passed it. Then later on, Lydia wasn't through with her help, because in the turn of the century, about 1900, during the year, 2 beds of $5,000 each were endowed by Mrs. Lydia S. Johnson in memory of George W. Vogel. So she paid for 2 $5,000 beds. This woman was devoted. She was there to help no matter who needed what. This is the information about the bill for her $12 a month. June 5th, 1886, so 20 years after the war. The bill for the relief of Lydia S. Johnson was considered as in committee of the whole. It proposes to place on the pension roll the name of Lydia S. Johnson of Yates, Orleans County, New York, a nurse in the Army during the late Civil War, at $12 per month. The bill was reported to the Senate without amendment, ordered to a third reading, read the third time, and passed. So she was somebody from Orleans County who was really the first woman to be employed that long in the Civil War and later as a nurse. And at this point, it was Dorothea Dix and the beginning of women's nursing. And she was one who learned it online and eventually got a retirement money for it. I think that's pretty awesome for somebody here from Orleans County.
Yeah.
And she was the only female to serve in the Civil War from this county. She, in 1898, gave a speech to the Literary and Historical Society of Lyndonville. And I'm not going to read you the whole thing because this is the whole thing. Okay, but I have it if anybody's considered wanting to read it. But I've highlighted a little bit here. There is a great deal of unwritten history that should be remembered. I know for the past few years, a great deal has been said about our forgiving and forgetting. Forgetting what? My friends, did you ever seriously consider what is meant by forgetting? I know that in the Book of Books, the book we all love above all others, we are commanded to forgive our enemies. Are we also commanded to keep them in remembrance? Remarks that I have heard about soldiers within the past few years have led me to think there were some that thought all the boys enlisted for was to go off somewhere for a good time, off for a lark, as some would call it. 'Tis true the soldiers that enlisted during the first few months of the war little realized the great struggle that was before them. I've talked with a good many of them, but they never admitted by word or act that they regretted in the least having enlisted. Let me relate to you an incident that I witnessed in the old warehouse hospital in Georgetown in the fall of 1862, just after the Second Bull Run battle. There had been a soldier boy who had just passed his 18th birthday by the name of Shepherd from Marblehead, Massachusetts, brought in there after having lain in the battlefield 8 days. The surgeons, upon examining the wound, found that one leg was so badly shattered that it would have to be taken off with the knee. He stood the amputation well, but it was only a short time after before it was discovered that tetanus had set in. And in about 2 days, the flesh had drawn back so that the end of the bone protruded nearly an inch. It was decided that his only chance of life was to have the bone cut off so the flesh could be brought up and cover the end of it. They tried it, but it was not of any use, and the flesh again drew back so the bone again protruded. He was a terrible sufferer the last few days he lived. The only way he could get any relief from that fearful pain was for someone to clasp around the leg with both hands as near where it was cut off as they could, and while clasping tight, press the flesh down over the end of the bone. It was very hard work, so we nurses took turns. Just a few hours before he died, while I sat holding him in, his suffering being so intense that a cold sweat stood in large drops all over his face, I looked up and a woman stood beside me. I was surprised, for it was strictly against the rules for anyone to go on that ward without permission. And then an attendant went with them to see that they did not brush against any of the wounded to hurt them. You must remember, that woman wore hoops in those days. I saw that she had a sneer on her face as she looked at him for a moment, and then said to him, "Now, I reckon you're sorry you enlisted under Lincoln." I never shall forget the look he gave her. It was only pity and sorrow combined, as he replied, "If I could have looked forward and seen how it would have ended with me, I should have enlisted. I count not my life too great a price to give my country. If I had done some little to help, which I trust I have, I'm content. I must say I was never so I will say so indignant in all my life. I don't know what I should have done had my hands been at liberty. As it was, I ordered her off the ward and spoke to an attendant to see that she went. She not only went off the ward, but out of the hospital. I never saw her again. Do not for one moment think our soldier boys forgot their loved ones at home. I wish I could describe to you how anxiously the mail was looked for each day. It talks about some of the men. The trembling hand reached forth for the long-awaited letter. The sorrow and pain on the face for those who had to say no letter for me today. Those scenes will always remain unwritten history because no pen or pencil could ever reproduce them on paper. To see home and kindred was their wish by day and their dreams by night. It is a wonder that they did as well as they did, as the government was not prepared for such a manslaughter. They had taken for hospitals, hotels, schoolhouses, churches, and even private homes. The Capitol building was full. They had put 500 in the patent office building, and finally this old warehouse was taken. The building was good enough, but the situation was terrible. I have mentioned these circumstances so that you might better understand why it was so hard to get things so necessary to have for the comfort of our boys. A doctor came around one after another and would ask, "Can't I sit up? If it would rest me so." The soldiers were saying, "Can't I sit up?" instead of laying in bed. He finally told them if they only had something to sit on. All we had to sit down upon was one wooden stool for each ward. The doctor knew me well enough to know that I would try to accomplish what I undertook. So he told me the best to get was an office chair, one that the seat would turn. It was his opinion that such a chair was the only one we could get them in safely. The boys and I talked it over, and I planned to see how we could be successful. I said to them, "I know what we can do. The first man that comes into this hospital looks pleasant, kind-hearted, and benevolent, I'll ask him for one." I went about my usual work. In a very short time, I heard a number of voices all at once say, "Miss Johnson." I looked to see what was wanted. I saw hands pointed toward the door, and then many saying, "There he is." And I saw the person they were pointing at. I did not wonder they were so sure the right one was there. It seemed as though a whole flood of sunshine came in with him. I started for him, and he made my errand known. He looked down at the ward, saw the raised heads and eager looks towards him. With a smile on his face and a nod of his head to them, he said, "Yes, I'll give you 2. Plenty of them in my office." So he did not tell us where this office was. Neither did I get his name. They all seemed to so well acquainted with him, but upon inquiry, found that they all knew him well. Said he was just splendid and so good to the soldiers. His errand in that day was to see if they were supplied with daily papers. Found they were not, and said 25 papers would be left there the next day, and then daily from that time on. But his name or where his office was, no one knew. We only had to wait until the next day about the same hour, when came the men to see if the papers had been sent. I then found his name was Eads, and his office was about 20 rods away. We soon had the chairs and 2 happy boys sitting in them. I could not begin to tell you how much good those 2 chairs accomplished. I think it's interesting to hear what it was actually like there, what the thoughts were. At another time, a young lady came in just as I was trying to get a boy who was so badly wounded that he only had a few days to live to eat his supper. He looked at the food and said he could not eat, but if he had some new milk before it got cold with some bread in it, it would taste good, and his mother used to let him have it every night when he was at home. She asked me what he wanted, and I told her. She said her folks kept a cow, and as it was about to be milking time, she'd go and get him some. In a very short time, she was back with some milk. I fixed it for him, and he ate it so eagerly that he did not say one word until he was finished. And then he looked up at us and said it almost made him think he was home with his mother. The young lady said to him, "You liked it," And his reply was, "Indeed I did. Will you bring me some more for breakfast?" She smiled and replied she would. From that time on until he died, which was within 7 or 8 days, she had his milk here at 6 in the morning and 6 at night. So he had his milk and his bread. I've not spoken for a long, weary tramps we had in going from one sanitary commission house to another, sometimes getting the desired articles and at others going home empty-handed. Then as a last resort, we would go to those grand, loyal Southern women with our troubles. We always got their help if possible, and their sympathy always. It must be remembered that in the winter of 62 and 3, there were no less than 12,000 sick and wounded soldiers in the District of Columbia. If you counted those in and around Alexander, you would have to multiply that number by 2. Our government was without means to do with, and they were very ignorant of the needs of so many. They had to learn by experience. We lacked help in almost everything else but bread. I never can forget the time we had when the news of Lee's surrender reached us. It was a jubilee such as I had never been experienced. The war was over. Home loomed up before the boys as never before. It seemed to them as though they were going to start at once. I remained there until the 27th of July. There were a good many there still when I left. I will close by urging you all to have a warm place in your heart for every soldier. Some have their faults, bad ones, but let us remember such the good they have done. And she gave this, and then in February of 1898, the next year after she gave this, she delivered at Ridgeville, Indiana, the GAR after the encampment at Washington, D.C. 1 year ago, last fall, I attended the GAR encampment at Washington, D.C. As I wandered around the city where I had been during the war, I found everything so changed. I visited the soldiers' home. New buildings were built, old ones made over. The grounds wonderfully improved. I went into the cemetery, that city of the dead attached to the soldiers' home, where so many soldiers were buried during the dark days of 61 to 65. That was also changed. In place of the whiteboard at the head of each grave, a nice marble slab was placed. Everything around the home showed that Uncle Sam had not forgotten his soldier boys. I spent some time at Arlington National Cemetery. No words of mine can give you any idea of it. One needs to see it to set an impression of what it is. A beautiful plot of ground is set apart for the burial of nurses of the Civil War. The old warehouse in Georgetown, where my first hospital work was done, I found just the same as it was during the war, only it was filled with barrels instead of sick and wounded soldiers. The Dunbarton Street Church, where my work was 3 months, had been modernized so that the inside was not a familiar look at it. The Union Hotel had been remodeled into a drugstore. Changed was written everywhere. The National Association of Army Nurses, of which I am a member, reminded me so much of change. From 1861 to 65, their faces were young and fresh. Now they are old and wrinkled, like mine. This was given by Lydia, the first nurse to be granted a pension, that by special act of Congress. And she was from Orleans County. Anybody have any questions? We have her whole remembrance in the local history room in a folder. But I thought it was good to hear the actual words rather than my reporting to you what had happened. I think it's much more impressive to hear it in her own words.
So I was wondering, so you said she got a commission from the government, $12 a month. 20 years after the war ended, it wasn't retroactive language.
No. No, and then from the reporting that I've read, she's lucky she got that.
Yeah.
I think part of it was guilt on the government's part, you know, all that she had been through, and what they expected her to do, and she hung in there and was in there forever and ever after she first started. And I think they couldn't really take it away from her. I think it would have made them look really bad if they hadn't let her have
She came home sick twice?
She came home once
Oh,
with
smallpox.
smallpox. Yeah, but she got better and she went back.
Yeah.
So I would say don't bicker about $12. Let her
Yeah,
have $12.
yeah, I just wondered, boy, she got all that 20 years, $12 a month.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's how she bought those 2 beds, $5,000 a piece.
Yeah.
She used her money somehow well, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned that she had no formal training. Women at that time had just what they learned from their mothers.
Yeah, it was taking care of people at home.
Taking care of family at home, which was better than what any of the men knew.
Oh yeah, and the men that did know how and had been the nurses in the camps were called out for active duty because there were so many men that had been killed. They were lacking in force. So the men got called out and these women came in with whatever training they'd had from home. And it wasn't until really about after the war that any real training schools started. But they had to learn from the war too, what things the nurses needed to know.
They have on hand.
Yeah. What you expected the nurses to do, how far do you want them to go? When do they stop and call in the doctor? I mean, there's a lot of little particulars that we'd never think of today. That if you're starting up the nurses from nothing, how do you start it? What do you teach them? I just think it was fascinating to know that one of our women was involved in that. And here Orleans County was one of the leaders.
Do you remember when women used to make bandages? Used to make bandages for the soldiers. Forever, tearing up sheets and stuff, and rolling them up, making bandages.
I know my grandmother talked about it. That I don't remember her saying she ever did it, but she knew people who made bandages.
Yeah, they used to have a whole church group that would get together and make these bandages and ship out.
Yeah.
There was a lady in the nursing home where I worked when I first got out of training, and she would crochet about this wide. This out of white cotton, and she would crochet every day. And then it would be wound up in schools, and I don't know what her children did. They said that she had always done that from a young woman on. And years ago, they were sent somewhere and used. But now, of course, they weren't.
But she still made it.
But they still bought her the stuff to do it with and she was in her 90s at that time.
Yeah. Well, women were helpful at home as well as being nurses at the site.
A couple of things mentioned, the bread and milk. When I was a little kid, I used to have bread and milk occasionally. It's something that you don't hear about.
You don't hear about it anymore at all.
In the 19th century, there were bread and milk sets made where you be a little plate, a bowl, and a matching pitcher, a bread and milk set. It was very popular.
Yeah, but that was kind of the pre-cereal.
Yes.
Now we have cereal that you don't need that bread and milk thing.
The other thing that I thought was very interesting that she mentioned towards the end of the piece that you read was the cemetery boards were replaced with white marble headstones.
Yep.
In my collection of mourning art, I have a headboard.
Do you? Yeah.
Very rare piece of Americana.
Well, when you think about the men who died and those certain amount that did get shipped back home, you had so many people in that cemetery. You didn't have the resources to make a stone for everybody's grave, You put up a wooden headstone so you knew who was there, had all the information on it. But it wasn't until the family could afford a stone.
Well, or the government.
Or the government, yeah.
The headboard I have is probably an inch and 3/4 thick, inch and a half, at least an inch and a half thick. It's probably about 10 inches wide, and it has a rounded top, and stencil on it is the name of the person and the company that he was with. And it's painted white, although it's old with black letters. And I would say about the bottom 8 or 9 inches of it was not painted. So it didn't stick down in the ground too far.
Not too far, but it was, that was the part that was in the ground.
16 inches or so.
Yeah.
And then they were easy to turn out.
Oh, yeah.
And then once the time elapsed, then they had enough time and money was available, and then to get a regulation headstone,
Right.
and took down that board.
Yeah. It's all those little things you don't ever think about when you think about.
He was so excited about getting bread and milk. I understand because that's what he was used to.
Yeah.
What were they serving for food? I wonder.
Well, I don't think they had all that much resource for food for them. But the bread and milk was an easy thing to feed the soldiers, and most of them were familiar with bread and milk in a bowl. So,
Probably warm from the.
oh yeah, yeah. And it wasn't chewy if you had a face injury, it was slid down easy, and so there were a lot of good points to it.
We had bread and milk when we were kids, and I always thought of it as a punishment.
Well, it wasn't very fancy, was it?
It was one of those things you either loved it or you would
It went better with a little sugar.
Oh.
A little sugar.
A little brown sugar is good too.
Now, she never married. She never married.
There's one report that she had married. But I couldn't verify any of it, or whether it was, sometimes when you find stuff on the internet, this Lydia Johnson from Orleans County got mixed up with Lydia Johnson from California or someplace, you know. So I didn't say it, but there was one report that she did get married, but by the time she came back home again, she was using Johnson as her last name.
I wonder how she accumulated her money, because she didn't make it on Baltimore.
Yeah, I don't know, but there's a lot of things I still would like to question about her because of her money. She was a single woman.
Yeah.
And at that time, you didn't have a whole lot of creds if you were a single woman in the Civil War.
I mean, in Louisville.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. She probably ended up with a bank account, but I'm not sure how old she was when she ended up with one.
Yeah.
Because having a woman apply for a bank account,
It was
it was a real tough thing. Because she wasn't, when she lived here, she was not married. So she was a single woman applying for a bank account. You know, in the 1860s, early 1870s, it'd be kind of iffy. I'd like to know whether she ever ended up with one.
Yeah, how many years she had to wait to get.
Yeah. So her money had to be stored at home, something.
Under the mattress.
Yeah. But I think it's very interesting to hear it out of her own words. I think that was the part that intrigued me, was that she had recorded what she thought and felt at the time. And that's to me, that's good stuff.
Anybody listening to her report, a young soldier, had to have just taken it to heart, you know?
Right. Because she told the actual events that happened. It wasn't just there were 10 soldiers in the room, She knew what that soldier was feeling, and the bone sticking out of his leg, and things that you didn't normally hear about. Yeah, so.
You gotta remember what they had to work with, not a lot.
No, not a lot at all. In fact, she was one of the first nurses, official nurses, you know, like Dorothea Dixon, the ones that we've learned about over history, she was one there too that I think should have been included.
Yeah.
You know, because she devoted most of her life to nursing. But there again, you know, when they put in regulations and who gets what, she was probably out of the scene by the time all those things got passed.
What year did she die?
I want to say 1930
I
something.
thought I heard you say 15. Bill just confirmed it.
Well, I'm not sure I'm right.
He said something like 1915.
Yeah, and that's something.
She lived a long life, though, 80.
Yeah, she did.
85.
I was going to say she was in her.
1915. She was born in 1830. Died in 1915. She's been 85.
Yeah, she served until 1865. So, you know, she lived quite a long time afterwards, too. She was something. I think she goes down in the Women's Hall of Fame as far as our county's concerned. Boy, you'd think I'd have it right here, but I have not got her death date.
You never can find it when you're looking for it. You never can find it when you're looking.
No, no. They don't even have it on the information where I found her on WikiTree. It's got her picture on it, but it doesn't have her death, her birth and death date. I think somebody's out to get me. Yeah. I don't know, must be they didn't figure it was important that she passed away. But I think it's pretty awesome that we had a woman like that in this county.
Yeah.
And the only woman to go to the war from this county.
Maybe kids in school and stuff should learn that too.
Hmm?
Kids in school should learn about that
Yeah,
too.
yeah, they should.
We didn't hear anything about it now. We went to school.
Well, I didn't know she was here until I was going through some things in the local history room, and here was her remembrance
Oh.
in a folder. Like where we've got some of the men who served in the military, we've got their remembrances or somebody growing up here, but it's all men.
Yeah.
And when I found this woman, I thought, what's this?
Yeah.
So I started reading and got the idea that I think I ought to promote this. I'll let people know that we had this woman here.
I'm glad you did.
I volunteered at the White House during the summer.
Uh-huh.
We had a lot of people in there. Of course, we talk about the history of the area and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And every once in a while, I'll get a history teacher that comes in, and their biggest complaint is they were never able to teach local history.
Oh, yeah?
They wanted local history, just like what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them did what they could to do research and stuff and find out what they could. It was local history.
And there is so much local history in any place, you know, in any area. If it just concentrate, I'm always finding something I didn't know, you know, on local history. Somebody that was famous nationwide. I didn't know about it. And I've been doing history in this county for over 30 years, you know. But I'm still finding people like her that went to the Civil War and was important, and people knew who she was, and she made a mark, and we've got a reminiscence.
Yeah.
You know,
No way you would mention it.
but that's what makes local history interesting
Yeah.
to me, is you find these people that were local and that were important, impressive people.
There was a lady in Kennedyville. Her name was Kate Rock, and she was like a midwife. And you got sick, you want to see Kate, or Kate came to your house and took care of you. And she was the closest thing they had to a doctor at that time. And I'd heard these stories my whole life. And when I was about 45, 50 years old, I finally realized that she was my great aunt.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
She had been married before, and my great uncle had died, and she married a man named Ron.
Ah.
And that's how she was known as Kate Ron.
Sure, she was known by her most recent last name. Yeah. Oh, that's impressive. That was a shock.
Yeah, it was, but like you say, it's interesting to know that the people in the past were like that,
Mm-hmm.
that took care of people, because there just wasn't any, going to the doctor.
Yeah.
So you could find the doctor.
Right.
You might even be there when you got there.
Yeah. Well, my grandmother took care of old people. That's what she would say. And when I was in high school, I'd get off the bus where she was helping this old lady and man. And my grandmother was in her late 60s at the time. But if you asked my grandmother what she did in her life, she'd say she took care of old people that needed help. And some of the people were like 5 years older than her, But that's the way people were. If there was somebody that was ill, somebody took over and helped. Whether you had a nursing degree or not, didn't matter.
You could still give them food and clean them up.
Right.
Dress. Yeah.
Yeah, the basics.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But, and I guess that's part of what gets me about not doing women's history. Because women did have an effect in their communities. They took care of the community while the guy was off fighting a war.
Right.
Or working in Rochester or something, who was here to take care of things. I guess that's what fuels my interest in women's history.
When I was young, I'm saying maybe 7, 8 years old, my aunt lived next door, and she would have her cousins and relatives and friends over for tea and pie or whatever. And because I lived next door, I was allowed to come over and have pie and
Sure.
go on with them. But I remember these old ladies, and they were old men, and they were talking about the differences between when they were growing up and what it was like then. And now this was back in, like 58, 59. And they were talking about how they would work all day and they would be pregnant. And it would come time for the baby to be born. They would go out to the outhouse and have the baby, come back in, get cleaned up, and finish supper.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah.
But that's why you go in the cemetery and you see the monument with the man's name on it, and 5 wives alongside him.
Yeah, it's true.
That's the reason they died.
Yeah.
But that's what was expected of them.
Yeah, you were a woman, you had a kid, take care of it, make supper. Yeah. It was one of those, duh.
Yeah.
I mean, what's a woman supposed to do? She's supposed to make supper, isn't she?
Yeah.
So you had the baby's out now, so you're okay.
Move on.
Yeah, okay, next on your list is
Wash needs doing.
Yeah.
Supper needs
to be made. Yeah.
Well, I remember at that age, it made an impression on me at that age.
Sure did.
And of course, I knew what an outhouse was. It's the only thing we had,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, in the house,
Yeah.
in the house that my husband and I have, we have an inside outhouse.
Oh.
On the porch off the kitchen was an enclosed 2-holder.
Oh.
Excuse me. We have a 2-holder outhouse attached to our kitchen. You got the fancy.
It was plastered on the inside with wallpaper.
Oh,
Yeah.
fancy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if that's what you have to use, you don't let it run down. You got to keep it up.
With a trellis in front of it, with beautiful climbing roses.
Fancy it up outside too.
The only problem with the climbing roses was it drew the bees.
Yeah.
I was always scared as a kid I was going to get stung.
You also get stung by those thorns, that they can jab.
Remember Reverend Grandma was the other house. Yeah. And the only thing you ever saw there was the Sears cattle. Cattle.
Well, thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.